At the very tail end of 2022, Luka Doncic had a 60, 20, and 10 game versus the New York Knicks, which was statistically one of the 10 best performances in NBA history. On top of that, we got another 50-piece from Luka versus the Spurs later on. Then we got back-to-back 40 pieces from a 38-year-old LeBron James. During Luka's night, we had another 40-piece as well, 48 and 10 from Joel Embiid. And of course, last night, we had another all-time great historic performance with Donovan Mitchell being 2 rebounds shy of a 71-point triple-double. Along with Mitchell, DeMar DeRozan had 44 on the other end, and the aforementioned 43 from LeBron on that night, another 42 and 11 from Embiid. Luka was 1 point shy from 40 with 39 that night, and we got a freaking 52-piece from Klay Thompson in 2023. That was a lot. So what the hell is happening? Real quick, if you end up enjoying this video, then please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, drop a like on this video to help it do better in the YouTube algorithm. It is seriously much appreciated. Going into 2023, my goal is to get this channel to 300 subscribers by the end of the year, so your subscription would be much appreciated. Fun side anecdote here. My dad did watch the Cavs game. He is a Bulls fan along with me. He had no idea that Donovan Mitchell had 71 points, and I find that hilarious. But I guess we can open with that performance first, because it's obviously the most ridiculous one that happened. The only one that's arguably as ridiculous is the Luka Doncic one. He did grab, 12 more rebounds, so there is that, but he also got 10 less points, or 11 less points, so whatever. Either way, regardless of which performance is more impressive, I would argue the Donovan Mitchell one for sure, because 70 is just, 70 is 70. He is the 6th player in NBA history to put up 70 points. Watching this game, it was just bombs away from deep, and then anything he tried to do in the paint either worked or resulted in him getting to the free throw line. Like, he was finishing through so much contact or dealing with so much contact that he got to the line. And in fact, I watched the highlights of the game again just as a refresher before this video, and it was very funny. If you look at the NBA.com's highlights of this game, there's like a minute interval that's nothing but free throws because of how much the Bulls were fouling. And I realized the thing that people always do when they look at a box score and they see a high scoring performance, but they also see that that player hit like 22 free throws, they like to freak out and be like, oh, this performance wasn't even that valid, it was just free throws. First of all, that's stupid. Free throws are a part of basketball. Second of all, this was not a poorly officiated game. The Bulls just could not stay in front of Donovan Mitchell. And third of all, he still would have had damn near 50, so who cares? At the end of the day, 70 is 70. I don't care how you put it. If it was on 40 free throws, you still had 70. To also, on top of that, have 11 assists. Like, he wasn't even necessarily looking for his shot every time, and he only had like 16 points in the first half. He just went off like crazy in the second half, and there was just nothing the Bulls could do. Every possession down the floor, he found a way to put points on the board, whether it was hitting a shot or getting to the line. And that was just, it was relentless. And the thing that is not being given enough credit is the fact that they were down rather substantially. This was a big L for the Bulls because obviously they got an L, but it was a big L because like they absolutely should have won this game, but then Donovan Mitchell was just like, no. Like, DeMar had a 44 piece himself, as I mentioned, and he had a 40 piece earlier on in the week. And like, I feel like that's something people would talk about. I'm pretty sure, if not back to back, like 2 out of the last 3 games, DeMar had a 44 point game or a 40 plus point game, but nothing was said about it because why the hell would you talk about that when when Donovan Mitchell had the 71? So shout out to DeMar for that, but also they lost, so who cares? On the other end of things, I want to talk about another game that happened that night, which was Klay Thompson having 50 plus points in 2023, which I realize like is just now the year, obviously, but that was kind of a stupid thing to say. I would have said Klay Thompson in 2022. You know what I mean? Klay has just not been the same since he returned from his both ACL and Achilles injury, which is perfectly understandable. Those are kind of severe injuries if you didn't know. They've kind of derailed a couple of careers. careers. So this game from Klay Thompson, it was weird because it felt like truly a mix of vintage Klay, but also a mix of this current day Klay Thompson who has a different shot diet. The way that Klay approaches the game now is just different than how he approached it before. I think the way he approached it before was a much better, much more winning formula. But regardless, he had his mid-range pull-ups, he had his weird awkward angle shots, he had his shots that he really didn't create enough space for, but he's such a good shooter, it doesn't matter that he didn't create enough space for it. Multiple mid-range pull-ups, but of course he also hit 10 threes, and that was the most substantial thing, including a bunch of clutch threes. So you got to give him credit for that. It was a really good overall game. Trae Young had a really impressive box score in this one. I do truly think that this game was more an instance of just, not to be a hater, but this is like a more Klay just being hot rather than this being necessarily a sign of him turning the corner. Klay Thompson's still a good player, like at this point, because he's still like a 40% from three on 10 plus attempts guy. So that ultimately makes you a pretty damn great shooter still, even if he's not quite what he used to be. But I do believe that this one is not necessarily a sign of like, oh, Klay Thompson is back. I think he's still capable of having these really on fire performances going forward, but ultimately he still has the issues with his shot selection that I don't think are ever going to be overcome unless he just really puts in the work too. And then let's talk about LeBron James. On his 38th birthday, he had 47 points against, I believe it might have been 48. Shit, let me Google it. LeBron had 47 points against the Atlanta Hawks on his 38th birthday, and he had 43 points yesterday against the Charlotte Hornets, and I very nearly went to that game, so I'm quite annoyed that he went off to the degree that he did. But what's interesting is how very different his approach was in each of these games. In this first game against the Atlanta Hawks, it was a lot of getting to the basket, of course, and then a lot of three-pointers. Whereas if you go to the Charlotte Hornets game, it's just mid-range after mid-range after mid-range. A lot of them were one-legged, which was interesting because it's not really a shot LeBron does a ton of the time, but he was just feasting on them against the Charlotte Hornets. He also had a couple of other plays. He had that crazy reverse alley-oop off of the Dennis Schroeder pass, obviously. But my point overall is LeBron went the hell off in two back-to-back games, two 40-point games back-to-back at 38 years old. And that's the thing that has to be highlighted here. And I know some people get tired of it, the whole LeBron is so old and he's still doing this shit thing. But ultimately, it genuinely needs to be highlighted because the most points per game out of a year 20 player previous to LeBron was 17 a game from Kobe. Yeah, LeBron James is currently averaging at 29 points per game. So 12 points better than the next best to do it. On also significantly better efficiency because that was post-Achilles injury Kobe, and he wasn't very good other than the Utah Jazz game. But either way, I just think that is endlessly impressive. Klay had that crazy performance. Luka obviously had a historic performance, and Donovan Mitchell managed to have an even more historic performance less than a week later. The NBA is insane right now, and this is where I want to lead the conversation to end off this video. I think we're getting to the point where the pace and space of this era is bringing us closer and closer to 60s era numbers. Not everywhere, because the difference really is going to be the efficiency. Because if you look at old 60s numbers, you'll see that even Wilt Chamberlain was barely shooting above 50% from the field, and he was like leading the league by doing so. Meanwhile, there were players who would average 30 but would shoot like 40% from the field. So we still have crazy efficiency now, but also these crazy high numbers because the pace only seems to go up every year. Teams seem to run as much as they can, and the three-point shooting just makes it easier to put the ball in the basket because even if those shooters are not even shooting, the mere existence of them keeps their defenders at bay, and that allows superstar players like LeBron James, like Luka Doncic, like Donovan Mitchell to just carve apart defenses because they either have to commit to stopping the player who's trying to score, or they have to leave a three-point shooter open in the process, or they have to stay home on those shooters and just hope those one-on-one defenders can handle it. And at this point, scores are getting so good that one-on-one defense really just doesn't cover it. So I'm almost feeling like this is a sign as well that basketball is more meant to be how it is now. Whereas like the 90s, the early 2000s, a little bit more towards the late 80s as well, there were a lot of rules that really overemphasized defense. And there were a lot of people who would argue that was more like, that's how it should be. Defense should be the priority, or the rules should favor the defense or whatever. But I truly think that just crazy high volume stats might just be the way this game is meant to be played, and we're returning back to it after the early times in the league where that was how it was. I do find it very interesting. The pace of this era is getting on par with the pace of the earliest eras in history, which were off the charts in that department. So yeah. I don't know that we're going to get a 50-25 season like Wilt Chamberlain put up in 62, but I do think we can get some stuff crazy like that, because Luka Doncic is averaging 35, 9, and 9 right now on plus like 5% true shooting versus the league average. So there are some inhumans among us, I guess. All I really wanted to talk about in this video was just how crazy all these performances have been. There's not really that much of an overarching point, but yeah, the NBA is great. I'm really loving the season so far, and I gotta get better at turning on these games as they're happening. Anyways, that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing the video, and goodbye.